colleague, and wonderful human, Charles Goldberg, all the way out in the holy land of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Welcome. So,
hi, what up?
As the title states, before we get started, we need to have a moment to remember the Tiger King with a
We were literally talking about this before we started. We were like, we've got to growl. This is great.
Wonderful. All right, Charles, let us know who you are, what you do, how you separate yourself from the pack, and then we'll get diving into the king himself.
Absolutely. So I'm a clinical psychotherapist based here in the holy city of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, not Israel. And I specialize in addictions. I also have a lot of very different yarmulkes. I sell life insurance, and I'm also a professional rapper. I'm constantly putting out new music. And yeah, man, it's just, this is one of my favorite things to do, is talk about psychotherapy and talk about psychology and kind of bring it to the mainstream in a way that's really fun and engaging.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad you're here. A returner to the podcast, by the way, everyone. Yeah. Thank you for being here for our second conversation.
Absolutely. For a second of many more.
Absolutely. So oh, hey, Sonia, Wilk, how are you? Good to see you. Glad you're here. So, as the title states, we are going to break down the Tiger King himself, Joe Exotic, and talk about what it looks like for him integrating mental health, where it should have been, how it could have been, and where we are.
Absolutely.
So, who's seen it? Thumbs up. Boom. If you've seen the Tiger King. Yeah. Pretty insane, right? Pretty cool. Yeah, pretty out there. Pretty exciting, pretty fun, pretty exotic. All the above. I mean, that was
so much animal print.
so much animal print.
Oh my God. And we're even rocking the matching hat. I should have done a cheetah print yarmulke. You know, that would have we could have gone next level there.
I know, man. We could have. So those of us who've seen the Tiger King, insane experience. If you want to let us know about your experience with the Tiger King, please feel free to mention it in the comments. We'd love to talk about it.
Absolutely.
Anyhow, so, Charlie, dude, what was your take? Come on.
I mean, the thing that really shocked me, and I mean, I, of course, view everything through the eyes of a therapist. So, I kept thinking to myself this entire time, man, Joe, he's such a character, and what I like about him is he's such a flawed human being, like the rest of us. We all have our issues. But I think it was really cool that if you look at the show through the lens of mental health, you can recognize that the Tiger King's demise could have been avoided had he just had maybe some psych meds and some therapy. And I couldn't help thinking that the entire time I was watching it. Like, I just felt tremendous compassion for the guy,
I agree.
Yeah.
As much as everybody put him out to be like this terrible, horrendous human, I mean, the dude had a very troubled past. I mean, I had empathy for him the entire time watching it.
Totally. And I mean, I think one of the things that's really interesting is you really do see, so it's actually interesting. At the basis of every mental health issue is something called cognitive dissonance. Whenever we behave in a way that differs from our values, we're always going to have some kind of issue that stems from it, And one of the things that I really took away from the show is that here was a guy who began really inundated in his values. He first of all opened this business to try to save tigers and raise awareness about them. He hired a bunch of people who were otherwise overlooked by the rest of society. He had really noble motives. And it seems that as things became more chaotic and they kind of spiraled out of control, this was when he and he started losing touch with those values. That's when things really went downhill quickly. And I think that right there is such an important lesson for all of us in terms of maintaining mental health, is that at the end of the day, we've got to remain true. And part of the way that we, are able to have happiness in our lives is when we're in touch with our values. Joe became more neurotic as the show progressed because he left these values. It's interesting. Have you ever had a person come to you when you're really upset and they say to you, yo, just be happy?
Yeah, of course.
Just be happy. And the thing is, what's really interesting, we don't have genesis. We don't have control over the genesis, over the vast majority of our emotions. But the one emotion we actually can control is joy. Mm-hmm. It's actually really interesting. joy is facilitated whenever we act in accordance with our values. We saw this guy, Joe Exotic, a person who was full of life and had a dream and had a vision and was really driven, except for, that bitch Carol Baskin. He was so driven though. Like he had such a clear path as to what he wanted to accomplish. And as soon as he focused more on her and his own fame, that's when things really started going off the hinges. But I think
and you saw that.
Lesson. Yeah.
I mean, they showed that.
Illustrating it. They really did.
In the sense of you go from the first episode where you see this younger guy, he's got all these people who he's hired, and he's starting this thing off. It started from a little thing to now it's a big thing, and how it wasn't about the money, and like you're saying, all about the value of what he could bring to the table. And as you saw him starting to make these videos about hating Carol Baskin and just demise, like the demise just showed on his face. I mean, constantly stressed,
absolutely
shit going down that wasn't supposed to. I mean,
seriously,
throwing the Cubs and all the things that surfaced, I think really culminated at the essence of insecurity for him.
And the thing that's so interesting, don't forget, remember, cognitive dissonance happens when we don't live in a way that's aligned with our values. Here's a man who is a gay man living in Oklahoma, a place where gays are not accepted.
Literally.
And the thing is, I don't feel like he was ever truly able, even though he had this like larger than life personality, it seems like that personality came very deeply from a place of insecurity.
Absolutely.
Part of the reason why I think he was as over the top as he was is compensation. Meaning, when we recognize, oh man, my securities are out there for the world to see, we're going to compromise by making ourselves bigger than life, larger than life. And we see this very, very frequently in people who are really deeply broken. We tend to smile and talk a big game when we're at our most unstable. And I thought it was very interesting how he did that. And the show depicts it oh so beautifully. And you see that even the people in his system, his employees and things like that, also picked up on just how unstable he was.
Yeah.
I can't help but think, what would have happened had this guy just had a therapist?
Or just somebody else to talk to, or communicate with, or find meds, or anything like that.
Exactly. I really, it's very interesting because I definitely think that there was serious mental health issues going on there. God knows when or how they originated, but if he just had a person to kind of process with who actually understood how to guide him and be compassionate towards him, because ultimately I think that's what he was always looking for. It wasn't even as in some ways. He wanted compassion. And by the way, something very interesting. So before I became like a master's level therapist, I was actually in a doctoral program. And if you're studying to become, the only difference between a psychologist and a psychotherapist is that psychologists do psych testing. Psychotherapists can do it too. But the main attribute, the main job of a psychologist is to do testing. And when I was in this program, it was the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. The first year and a half, 2 years was all about learning how to administer these tests. And the most complicated one to administer was the Rorschach. You heard of the Rorschach, right? The ink blot test. So, by the way,
that guy?
There you go, right on top of it, okay? And actually, really interesting, just a side note, did you know that Herman Rorschach, the guy who developed the test, looks identical to Brad Pitt?
Really?
I'm not even kidding. You can go online, you can Google it right now. It is scary. Total doppelganger, it's crazy. Well, anyway, so the thing that's really interesting is how the test is scored is you have people look at these ink blots and kind of report what images they see in the ink blots. And based off what their responses are, you're able to assign them different scores and things like that. One thing that's very interesting that we learn about people who tend to see more animals in the ink blots tend to have issues relating to human beings. And what's interesting is, if you can't necessarily relate to a human, an animal is a very good alternative. A very good alternative, because they are capable of providing you with love and companionship and things like that. Yes, the relationship is a little more one-sided, but at the same time, an animal is, because it's less complex than a human, it's also safer than a human.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people recognize that. And I think that was one of the things that happened with Joe, because he was so unique, because he is such a different soul. It makes sense that he leaned into animals. That was one of the
he
things
stated that. I remember from the couple first episodes of, I'm in this because I love the animals and preserving them. But I remember him saying something like, yeah, there's more of a mutual benefit for me bringing them into my life than anybody would ever know.
Yeah.
And really owning that aspect of it, because it's so true. I mean, the guy was he's an odd fella and really realistic.
Exactly. He's the odd version of like an old cat lady. You know what I mean?
Really?
Like that's like an extreme version of a cat lady. To
the extreme, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. But the exotic version, I should say.
Right.
But I think it was really interesting. Especially we see that, and I think another lesson to take away is, just like I kind of alluded to earlier, how when there's a person in your life who's got an unresolved mental health issue, how easy it is to drag down the entire system that they're a part of. Yeah. Now, this could be something very controversial to say. And, I told you I specialize in addictions. And I kind of want to go this route for a second, because I think it's a really important point to make.
Ready for it.
So I always ask my clients who are addicts, I always say, well, if addiction is a disease, just like diabetes or cancer, can you really get angry at an addict? And the answer is absolutely. Because if you think about it, okay, if I have diabetes and I'm snarking down Skittles like no one's business, that is highly irresponsible. You better get angry. Yeah. And, the thing is that I think is really important, because Joe Exotic was a leader. He is a leader, even to this day. There is nothing wrong with you if you have a disease, if you have a mental health disorder. But what you do have more than anything is a responsibility. If you have a disease, if you have a mental health disorder, it is a responsibility. It is your responsibility to take care of. So like if you have depression, I have compassion for you. You have depression, but at the same time, it's your responsibility, if you're depressed, to not just sit there and mope, but to actually find help for yourself. Mm-hmm. It is your responsibility, and that's a hard thing for other people to kind of bear. A lot of people wanted to save Joe. A lot of people wanted to try to take care of him and things like that, but ultimately, no one was able to.
Yeah, I would agree. I think one thing I took from seeing his interaction with himself throughout the 8 episodes of the series was how it was almost like he was unable to represent what that looked like for him in the grand scheme of things. It was always about others or blame or things like that really seemed like got in the way of him being like, yeah, I have an issue.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It was so hard for him to recognize that.
And, it's so interesting, because I think part of the reason why that is, there are 2 types of vulnerability, right? The first type of vulnerability comes from a place of tremendous weakness. And, it's a place when we're just put on the spot, we're stuck, there's nothing else we can do, we're just in that spot. There's another type of vulnerability that comes from a place of strength. Now, that's a crazy thing. This is like the work of Brene Brown. This is a really nutty. Yeah, I'm crazy over her. But this is like an insane thing to kind of conceptualize and understand. You could be strong being vulnerable. That runs very, very like counterculture to everything that we're taught. Mm-hmm. But the idea is that we can use vulnerability as a tool to deepen our connections with other people, places, and things. Now, the thing that was, what was that?
Daring greatly.
Daring greatly. Boom. So good. Okay. But what's really interesting is I don't think, as much as a character and as a showman that Joe was, I don't know if he ever was able, even with his husbands, if he ever truly felt able to be vulnerable in front of them.
Well, he was constantly comparing himself to others. I noticed that and recognized that, and if you can't love yourself, how can you ever be in a position really to be vulnerable with others, care for others, give them like your true sense and authentic self forward?
And that's the thing. I really think that had he just been a little bit more vulnerable and a little more sincere, before everything spiraled out of control, had he said, look, that's it, I can't, I need help. That's one of the most vulnerable, I always say to people, and this is such a profound lesson. What are the 3 most important words in any relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I
People say all the time, okay, well, it's really close. It's I was wrong.
Right. Yep.
I was wrong. If you say that, if you're able to say that, that is the ultimate vulnerable statement. I need help is right up there. I need help. It's so hard. It's so scary to ask for help, because when you do, there's only a two-part reaction that people could give you. It's either I accept you and I reject you, and I'll accept you and I'll support you and I'll give you the help that you're looking for, or it's going to be I'll reject you.
Yeah.
And if you reject me, that even puts me at a lower position. So
it brings that back up, or
it validates the whole problem.
Yes, exactly. It validates the feelings that you've had. Totally.
Exactly. And so the thing that I think is so interesting with him is, boy, oh boy, you know, if he was able to just find one person, whether it's a therapist, a friend, someone to just be open and honest with, and to be sincere with, and to be vulnerable with, I think people would have liked him even more.
Yeah, I think they would have been able to see his true colors, really, like from his values and goals and things that he had originally set out to do.
Yeah.
Rather than this hillbilly crazy person that has guns everywhere and
exactly,
at the drop of a dime will try to kill somebody, shoot something, destroy somebody, you know?
Absolutely. And so I just think I find he's such an interesting character, because it's the epitome of what happens when we don't take care of ourselves. I think this story is part of the reason why it resonates so deeply with all of us, is because deep inside all of us, I think we have a Joe Exotic. I think we have that piece of us that's kind of unique, that we're afraid to kind of acknowledge in public, that we're afraid to kind of be present to everyone in a sincere fashion, that we try to mask, that we try to blow up, that we try to peacock. And we see what happens when that part of ourselves goes kind of haywire and doesn't receive the proper light and attention, you know? So that's part of the reason why I like him so much. You know, he represents this part of me that's very uncomfortable. This part of me that's like seeking some kind of just like acceptance and love. And I think that's part of the reason why, like, it's so interesting. Even though he's done some horrible things, I think there are so many people who really, really love him as a person, having seen like what he's about and things like that. Like, despite everything he's done, I think now, because what is vulnerable is because we've seen this show, and because we've kind of see the parts of his life that he's afraid to speak about, because we got that look, now he doesn't even need to be vulnerable, because just his presence there made him that way.
Yeah. I mean, we got to see a short life blippet of what it's like to honestly go through that spectrum of everything and anything we're discussing. Really. I mean, we literally, from first episode to the last, you got to see all and any of what Joe Exotic is like. And when you hear him on the phone in prison, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, but you tend to get and hear that emotion and that frustration and that sadness and that, you know, like I remember last episode, he's like, I'm on the phone and he's like, this is the worst place I've ever been. Like, why did I ever get myself in this position? Like, owning
his vulnerability.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
And, you know, I also think, speaking of that conversation, and this was another really important takeaway that I think makes this video that we're recording right now so precious. You know, it is a part of our job as counselors, and I think part of the reason why you do these videos and you do this series is to kind of raise awareness about mental health.
100%.
You know, and part of the reason why it needs awareness is because Joe Exotic is a perfect example of how people with mental health issues get taken advantage of by the system.
For sure.
Dare I say, I am on the side of the fence that believes sincerely that Joe, despite doing wrong things, I think that the two men that he kind of, you know, allied himself with really did frame him. And I think I think the reason why they were able to kind of come out of this situation with hands somewhat cleaner than Joe's is because they don't have the same type of mental health issue that he does. When they present themselves, they're at least able to mask some of their feelings. They're at least able to think before they speak.
Present in the way that's socially appropriate.
Exactly. And as a result of Joe being unable to do that, we've seen how the system has really let him down and even taken advantage of him. And I think this is another extremely, extremely important lesson to learn here. Because if anything, this should be a show that advocates for mental health rights. And it really does. It's at the end of the day, had this man been a little bit more stable, we would still have a Joe Exotic, theme park, and he would be out and he would be okay.
Animal Sanctuary,
right? It would be there.
Yeah.
And it's just, I think that this is it's a heartbreaking thing, and I think that's also where people's compassion comes from.
Definitely.
Is because when you see a person with a really serious mental health issue, yeah, there's initially some fear, there might even be some disgust, but when you also understand like who they are as an individual, it's very easy to be compassionate to those people. And I think you and I get to see this on almost a daily basis, but not everyone does. And in our country, in the United States, 1 out of every 4 adults over the age of 18 has a serious mental health problem. So this is around us way more than we expect, that we're used to. But the thing is that when these things go unacknowledged, when these types of issues go undetected and things like that, potentially people who we love and care about could really get exploited. So the idea is, if you know a person who's in Joe Exotic's position, there are therapists out there. There are people out there who are capable of helping. People don't just need to suffer with mental health issues, and the thing is, are you going to own up to the responsibility of having a mental health issue and actually get help for yourself? And there are so many easy ways of going about it. There's telehealth. There's Psychology Today is a great search engine to find therapists like both of us. It's such an important thing for people to really do. And especially during COVID, I think that's the other thing that's so cathartic about watching this show. I don't know about you.
I'm right in the middle of this.
Right? And if you think about it, it's great. Like, now we see his chaos, and our chaos is like nothing compared to that.
Right, yeah.
Right? So there is something very gratifying about that.
Well, I think that's why people got into it so much.
Yeah.
Like, they saw that there was shit going down. They're like, oh, I can watch this shit go down and binge this and be like, yeah, recognize, realize, understand where I am, and if I need to go get help, right? Or if I need to check myself, and really see where I'm at. Because, after watching that a couple episodes, I remember being like, to Lauren, I was like, give it a week. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Right?
It's seriously. And it's just unbelievable how things spiraled out of control. And I got to say, I loved the way it was filmed as well. Mm-hmm. I really do. I think that they did their best to try to present the situation in a neutral manner. And the testament to that is now everybody has picked sides, and I love that. I think that's what you want a show to do, is you want it to get people thinking.
Well, you want it to embrace emotion, yeah, and connection, of course, and
absolutely
whatever side. So you got to be with the good guy, the bad guy, or the neutral guy.
Exactly.
And, it's kind of broken down in that way. I would agree completely.
And it's funny that you say that. You got to be with the good guy, the bad guy, or the neutral guy. And I love that statement. And I think part of the reason why I like that so much is because in this show, I'll tell you something really interesting. My Rabbi Ben Chiyun, he says something extremely profound. He says that the greatest achievement of mankind is the ability to bear opposites simultaneously.
Yeah, opposite action.
What we do in our lives is we look at people, we judge them, and we fit them nicely into cabinets. We say, or into boxes. We say, you're good, you're bad. You're nice, you're mean. Right? What's really interesting with this whole story is that the characters are so multifaceted that it's not just one or the other. And loving Joe Exotic means you actually have to love his flaws too. Same thing with Carol. Mm-hmm. If you really like Carol and you support her and you think that she's coming from a place of purity, you have to be able to accept her flaws as well. And they're out there. Everyone recognizes it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I like about this show, is it kind of forced two very confident, kind of masked, facaded people. It presented them in a way that makes them very vulnerable and nuanced. And I really think that if we want to have healthy relationships, yet another lesson to glean from the show is that we have to recognize that everyone is multifaceted, that we both have dark and light sides to our personalities, that even the nicest people in the world have their downsides, and even the most screwed up, like evil, sadistic people also do have parts of them that are very kind and giving and altruistic.
Yeah.
And I like the fact, because we have to break away from this black and white thinking. We really do, as a society, as a nation. Joe Exotic is a really, really good role model for us to kind of show what it's like to see the whole person. And as therapists, that's what we have to do every day, So I don't know. I just think there's such great lessons to take away from this. What else came up for you?
I want to shout out really quickly to Kristen and Paulie for saying, hey, happy Friday. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos. I think the one thing that I really recognized from watching the show was how much comparisons can really get in the way.
Absolutely.
For people's mental health. And I think they said it numerous amounts of time, where Joe was like, I saw a doc and I was like, that's what I want to be, and that's how I want to be it. And, with the husbands, with the wives, with the park, with the, all those things. And I feel like it really just led to a lot of building into that insecurity, into the downfall of, well, if I'm not like this, then what's my worth? And I saw, and I feel like I saw that run through even with Carol in some ways. Like, how does she find herself being in a position to be where she's at? And, her whole backstory too, like, we forget about that.
It feeds into that.
She
had a dream to present herself as a professional, as a wealthy person, as a business owner. And she did whatever she had to do in order to get to that, even if that wasn't necessarily what was best for her or meant for her. It's actually very interesting. This reminds me of a beautiful Hasidic story. There was a very famous rabbi. His name was Rabbi Zusha of Anipoli. And this guy was the closest thing to a Jewish saint you could get. Okay, he was a complete tzaddik, a person who's completely perfectly righteous. And he went through life in a very upright manner. And, fast forward many, many years, and we find him on his deathbed, and he's trembling. And his students say, how could you be afraid of death? Paradise is awaiting for you. Like, you've lived such an upright life. You have acted like a righteous person every moment of every day. And he says to his disciples, look, maybe that's true. Maybe I've acted like a righteous person every single day. But I'm nervous that when I get up to the pearly gates, they're going to say, why didn't you act more like a Zusha? Okay? Why didn't you act more like yourself? The only reason why we come into this world, according to the words of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, I brought this up last time, is because God senses a deficiency in existence. We have a purpose here. Our purpose is to be genuinely ourselves. And this is part of the reason why I think people suffer so much when they're unwilling to be vulnerable, and when they're unwilling to really live with their values, is because that's the whole purpose of being alive, is to be ourselves. We're not supposed to try to be someone else. We're supposed to be us. And, in some ways, Joe did that. In other ways, not so much. And you're 100% right with the comparison. But it tends to be that when we kind of figure out what it is that we stand for, and we live in that way without cognitive dissonance, that's what leads to a happy life. So
couldn't agree more, man. Thank you so much for that wonderful end of our interview and that story.
Totally.
Really appreciate that. And as always, let us know where we can find you.
Totally.
Throw some resources out there.
Absolutely. It's talktocharlie.net. And if you want to listen to some great Jewish rap music, hardcharlie.com. But thank you very much. And also connectedroots.net is where the hatted therapist is at. Our boy Elliot Andre. Seriously, such a gangster. Oh, I literally can't even handle your swag right now. Like, seriously, this is just crazy.
Wonderful. So glad you were on. I think people will take this conversation quite seriously because it is so damn relatable. Happy Friday, everyone out there.
Happy Friday. Good Shabbos.
Out. Catch y'all later. Peace.
Deuces. Bye-bye.